Genesis 11, Tower of Babel. All right, let's start reading and we'll go from there. Genesis 11, verse 1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. I'm probably going to stop every verse for the first 9 verses. This right here by itself is extremely impactful if you understand what it's saying. There is several levels of spiritual laws. We have to do a lot to cover everything that's here. Several levels of spiritual laws that people don't realize, particularly in the church. There's certain things that the world does a better job of than the church. In Luke 16, Jesus says this. Jesus says, there's going to be times when the Christians just simply mess up due to not understanding what their spiritual, or what he was getting at was not understanding your spiritual abilities. And he said, in those times, go to the world. They're going to keep you in everlasting habitations because it says, the children of men in their generation know more or have better understanding than the children of light. Or in other words, they know how to do what they do better than we do. And I say that to say that there's multiple levels of spiritual laws on this earth that are actually exercised by and recognized better by the world than they are by the church. I'll give you a really easy example. Karma. Karma, first of all, is a pagan word. So I don't use that word except to give this example. It's pagan. It's a pagan in origins. You track back the origins and you know that this is not something that Christians should be talking about as of God. Yet the concept behind karma is 100% true. Karma itself, pagan. The concept that they're saying, 100% true. It's simply Genesis 8:22. Seed time and harvest. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest shall remain. Whatever you sow, that you'll reap. You'll see it in Galatians. It says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So it is a sowing and a reaping. And then when you get into the kingdom, what Jesus set up, he says it this way. He says, blessed are the merciful, because they shall obtain mercy, and things like that. And so, in other words, these are spiritual laws they're going to give you based on what you're getting. The world did a better job recognizing how God framed this world, so they gave it a name, and they called it karma. There's a lot of that in the world. There's a whole lot. They manifest things now. They like to manifest everything. We go manifest it by believing. That ain't nothing but faith. So it's just biblical principles that are renamed and repackaged for the world, but they do a better job. And oftentimes at understanding this, or at least trying to name it, than we do sometimes. Here's something that I need to just take a moment to break down. There's different levels of spiritual law. There are 3 levels of law in which we can categorize these in. There is physical law, that is gravity. What goes up must come down for the most part. There is then universal laws, and that's where I want to hang out in today. And when we go past the universal laws, I'll go back to that in a second. There's kingdom laws. And kingdom laws are the new things, the things that Jesus set up, what he was so excited about. He kept saying, the kingdom of God is like this, the kingdom of God. And then he would tell you things like, blessed are the merciful. And I've given you examples before of how when you actually access these laws, it makes supernatural miracles happen in your life. It bends every rule of normal reality because that's what Jesus came to bring, a kingdom for us. But there's still that middle ground. Universal laws. Universal laws are laws that are pretty much, I would consider them spiritual by nature, based on what we would call it anyway, yet they're accessible by anyone in the world. Man, you do not have to be saved to deal with the universal law. Again, the law of seed time of harvest, or what the world calls karma. Universal law. Whatever you give is what you're going to get. That works even with a non-Christian in sowing. If somebody who was non-Christian that had a business who came to the church and gave his tithes, his business would thrive, period. Because that is a law of seed time and harvest. You do not have to be a Christian to access these universal laws. They're spiritual, but they're accessible by everyone. Well, here is a big one, and this one is unity. And I want to show you why this is important. Matter of fact, I should have brought this verse up. Let me see if I can find the verse real quick. It's in Revelation 10 kings have one mind. see if I have that verse. Revelation 17:3. Okay, I'm good. So here there's a spiritual law of unity that we don't talk about very often. Sometimes we'll cover it very briefly saying, hey, we must be united. One can chase 1,000, two can chase 10,000. If you look at that, what that scripture is saying, it's telling you that there's a real law there. If one can chase 1,000, but two can chase 10,000, that multiplication, that's not just a wording that the Bible is using. It's letting you know there's something that's accessible by two people being in lockstep one with another. This is why Satan is so against marriage. Because God says, as marriage, you are one. Satan does his best to keep you disunited so that you cannot have 10 times the impact of what you would have had by yourself. This is a universal law. Well, here in this entire chapter, by the way, is about this law, universal law. So here in Genesis 11, we see it says, then the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. It's not being redundant. It's not just saying they had one language, they had one language. It's saying they had one language and one speech. Or in other words, that which they were speaking was similar, was the same thing as the other person. Nobody was saying something different. It's almost crazy to even consider that in today's time, because everybody got their own idea. There's too many Indians, too many chiefs in every tribe. Everybody, this one wants to go this way. The deacon board wants to go this way. The choir thinks we should sing this. No, this says they were all of one language and they all had the same speech. They were all saying the same thing. The Bible shows that faith is activated based on what you say, and it is amplified by unity. It shows you all through the New Testament and the Old Testament. And the same thing applies to the universal law of unity, even for regular men. I'm saying for regular men because these people who built this Tower of Babel, these are pagans. These were people that were anti-Christ. And yet you're going to see how much power they were able to access based on understanding this universal law of unity. So it says they had one language and one speech. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna start proving this to you. In verse 2, it says, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. Remember this, Shinar, because Shinar is modern day Iraq today. It is what the Bible refers to as Babylon. Continuing on, verse 3. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad the whole face of the earth. We're going to spend some time on that verse there. Let me keep going. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one. I want you to catch that. There's some bad English there. The next verse he's going to make the English language. But here he intentionally used bad English. Why? Because he was expressing the oneness of these people. The people is one. They were not are one. Are is a plural form, and even are somewhat represents a division. He's saying, no, they all had the same language. They all had the same speech. They all were saying the same thing. These people is one. They is it is because it is a singular. And they are singularly united against God. Continuing on. And they have one language. And this they begin to do. And I guess this is one of the most powerful verses. And now nothing will be restrained from them in which they have imagined to do. This is God speaking. It says that these people decided they were going to make a tower. Now, I just want you to consider the insanity of at least the surface level. They're going to make a tower to heaven. How? This is way back in Genesis chapter 11. They ain't got no spacesuits. we're not traveling through space yet. You just go up high enough, just in building in general, you're going to run out of air. There's all kinds of issues that they were going to run into, significant issues before they were going to reach heaven that we can't reach with our technology today. And yet, God himself came down and said, oh, they're going to do it. They will make it. Matter of fact, he said nothing they even think about will be stopped. There is a spiritual law that Satan has done a very good job keeping the church out of, that is unity, that has a significant power that people are not realizing about. These people built this is how I believe, in my opinion, just a guess, that the pyramids were built. A lot of people have so much conjecture. Aliens built them, whatever. Is how they make these big, massive blocks. And if you look at the angles of the pyramids and the mathematics and how they are, it's literally set to such a perfection that it's impossible for anybody with a normal mind to be able to do that. And then physically, it was impossible. And yet it was done. It was the spiritual law of unity. It may have something to do with the Nephilim too, by the way. But the spiritual law of unity causes you to be able to get to things significantly more than the regular world. I really need to show this in so many different ways. I gotta let's deal in what Babylon's going to become, just as a proof here, real quick. No, I'm getting off track. I'll go back to that. God said, verse 7, go, let us go down there, confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So this is where all the languages come from. Prior to this, everybody was speaking what was probably Hebrew. So I need you to understand something. This part right here was not something that you would consider in a normal basis of what God's plan was. I'm not saying that he didn't anticipate it. God anticipates everything. He prepared for everything. But in the normal process of what his plan was, this wouldn't have been in it. Changing languages. Changing of the languages so that we have multiple language is solely for one reason. It's because these people, pagans, discovered the spirit of unity in a powerful way and weaponized it against God. And because God gave man, catch this, authority on earth. Psalms, I think it's 115 and 116, or 116 and 115. It says, the heavens are God's, but he gave the earth to the children of men. Or in other words, once God gave over dominion of the earth to man, he no longer maintained that dominion that he gave to us. He's going to take it back. In Revelation, that's what the seals are about, repossessing the earth. And it had to be a man that could give the earth back to God, which is why Jesus was born a man and why his favorite title was Son of Man. Just like so you understand this is all about authority, because the earth belongs to men. Therefore, if these men decided to rebel against God, they had that right, and they had the power to utilize the spiritual laws even against God. But God says, oh, we're not time for that yet, because this is one of those things that would cause me to have to destroy the world. I promised I wouldn't do that again back in Genesis chapter 6, at least not by water, not until the end of days. So God says, let me give you a temporary game plan to stop them from where they're going. And that temporary game plan is, I'm going to change the languages. You can't be united if you can't speak to each other. And you certainly can't be all saying the same thing if you can't even all speak the same language. And that is the reason why languages exist today and we're not speaking Hebrew. Solely, I believe it's solely because these people weaponized unity. Imagine what life would be like if the church ever figured this out and weaponized it against the kingdom of Satan. If the church ever truly got united on one page when people weren't dealing with politics and their collars and all the other stuff and money and all the issues that people come up with, clout, and just focused on God, this power of unity by itself would call, you see it when churches, there's churches that I follow now, and you see the people united, you feel it, you hear their conversation, and I see they don't have a lot of the same issues that regular churches have. They don't have, for example, there's one that I'm thinking of right now, I won't call his name, but the church is only 3 years old, bless you, Bishop, love you, 3 years old, and they just bought a $7 million building. I could have told you that was coming because I've been speaking to the people in that church for the last year and a half, about a year, and they are so united. They all say the same thing. It's so unusual and refreshing at how united they are. And then catch this, I've never seen them collect an offering. I've been to services there. They always forget to collect the offering. They don't even collect it. So it just, because the money comes. Why? There's a spiritual law, several spiritual laws in place there, but one of them is unity. So here, God said the people is one, and whatever they think to do will not be restrained from them. Now, how are they going to build a tower to heaven? Now, let's get to that a little bit. The word here is Babel. it means two different things. One, because of what happened here, which means gibberish, because God made them start speaking gibberish. But the other thing that it means, Bab means gateway. And we already know El always means God. Elohim, El Shaddai. That's God. Um, and so this literally means a gateway to the gods, or to God himself. At this point, it was just one God. After this, we get multiple gods, concepts of multiple gods. But at this point, it was a gateway to God. Now, Josephus tells you that they were trying to build the tower in height in order to spite God in case he were to ever flood the earth again. They wanted to be high enough to be over those floodwaters. Again, it was something against God. But just because that was the physical aspect of that does not mean that they were attempting to actually build their way through space into heaven. Because again, God said that they would have accomplished it. So what was it that they were building? There's a thing called a ziggurat, and it may not be a ziggurat. It's just a concept, an idea I want you to think of. And what that is a tower type building, and every step is supposed to give you access to the particular deity that you're trying to access. It is a way, it's like a physical building of a Ouija board. It allows spiritual access to be able to enter into the physical domain. It is something that you can build that gives you access from the spiritual to let spirits have more access into the physical. I believe that they were building something along those lines. They had an understanding of spiritual things. Now I'm going to go to what's going to happen later and build my case here. There's a place that's going to come called Babylon. And guess where it is? The same location. It's going to be built right here in Shinar, the Tower of Babel, where the Tower of Babel used to be. Babylon is going to be the nemesis of all of the Bible for the entire time we have a Bible. They're starting somewhere in Kings Chronicles time period. You're going to start dealing with, right after Hezekiah, you're going to start dealing with Babylon coming and causing trouble and eventually overtaking the Jews and putting them into captivity. And then all through the New Testament, they always refer to the end times as Babylon. When Rome was oppressing Israel, they referred to them as Babylon. Even though they were Rome, they referred to them as Babylon because Babylon is considered the arch nemesis. Babylon started here at the Tower of Babel. Now, there is a statue in Daniel chapter 2 that is given that tells them the future empires that are coming. Now, in Daniel chapter 2, this viewpoint is kind of from a Gentile viewpoint. You'll see that the language shifts from Hebrew to Phoenician, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a Gentile language. And he literally shifted the Gentile language for multiple chapters. And while it's in the Gentile language, he describes the kingdoms in a way that makes them seem somewhat beautiful. Because according to the Gentile king that he's describing this to, and the Gentile king Nebuchadnezzar who had the dream, it's a beautiful thing to him. But then when we get to Daniel chapter 7, the language switches back to Hebrew. In other words, now we're talking back to the Jews and we're looking from the perspective of heaven, and they describe those same empires as beasts. But from the beautiful standpoint, when Nebuchadnezzar had this dream in Daniel chapter 2, he said, I see a statue. Remember the dream that Daniel had to interpret? I see a statue, and the head of that statue is the head of gold. And Daniel said, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. The head of gold is Babylon. This is the empire that is running the entire world right now. You are gold because you're the most precious empire. I tell you all this just so you can get to that part. The most precious empire, because the next empire he tells you that's coming is going to be Greece, but Greece, no, it's not. Medo-Persians, the Medes and the Persians, two arms, and they were silver. But then after the Persians, then we went to Greece and they were bronze. And after Greece, we go to Rome and they're iron. So they seem to be losing their value even though they're technically getting stronger, because iron is much stronger than gold, but it's less valuable. And then you get to the toes and it's iron mixed with clay, meaning it's going to be brittle and they're not going to mix together. That's what there's a lot of prophecy in that. We'll get to that when we get to Daniel. But I want you to understand that by value, the highest one was Babylon. Why? Because I believe it's because they understood spiritual laws in a paganistic way that is far greater than our common understanding today. And as those spiritual laws were lost, the value of the kingdoms became less. But even though the kingdoms physically became stronger, Rome was much stronger, most likely, than Babylon in military artillery and those things like that. But value-wise, Babylon had more money. Babylon made almost everything out of gold. They dealt in gold with everything, and they also had real spiritual laws. That's what the Chaldeans were. They were spiritual scientists. They were astronomers. They were scientists, and they were priests all at the same time. They put it all together, and they talked and they showed things in the stars. And this is where you get your magi from. And catch this: the magi are the people that come find Jesus by following. At first, they eventually studied what Daniel said and realized, oh, he knows what he's talking about. And since Babylon had better understanding of spiritual things, guess who accepts Christ before the Jews do? The magi, essentially witch doctors. The pagans understood that this star and these prophecies are lining up to something better than the Jews do. So when we get to Luke 19:42, Jesus cries over the city. It says, if you would have known what this day was, if you would have used the calendar to count the math that I gave back to Daniel, I told you it would be 483 years from now that I would show up. Here's my day. If you would have known, you would have had peace. But because you don't know what's going on, you're going to lose your land for almost 2,000 years. This is a prophecy from Jesus. He doesn't say 2,000 years there. He gives that in other ways. But this is a prophecy from Jesus in Luke 19:42. It's the same time when he said, if these people didn't praise me, the rocks would cry out. He was saying, look at what today is. It's a special day. And the Jews don't even know it. But you know who did know it? These magi. These people from Babylon and Persia, because they understood spiritual things better than even the people that God came for. So God shifted and went for 2,000 years, that's where we are now, to the church age. And he said, I'm going to go to the Gentiles, because at least the Gentiles paid attention to the spiritual things in the skies and the calendar. Therefore, they are going to get an opportunity for the entire world to be saved. This is how God brought us all in. I'm saying that to let you know, in Babylon, they had better understanding of spiritual things, and they were trying to access, and apparently were able to access, the gateway to God. They were pulling spiritual things into the natural. Now, let me show you how all this culminates and what this has to do with today. First of all, let me show you authority again. God says in verse 7, let us go down there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Verse 8, and the Lord scattered them abroad from thence the face of all the earth, and they left off the building that city. Therefore, the name of it is called Babel, because the Lord did confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. I want you to catch something. I want you to understand the importance of the authority of man. God, everything in the Bible that God does, he always uses a man. There's somebody praying. There's somebody speaking it. There's somebody lifting their hands. There's somebody man-wise authorizing what God's going to do on the earth. That does not diminish in any way the power of God, because man doesn't have any power. We have authority, not power. He's the one that has the power to cause things to happen. And if you don't do what he told you to do, he can go to the next person. So he's still sovereign. At the same time, in his sovereignty, because he gave the earth to man, he does not violate his own laws. So he uses man to authorize anything on earth. So here, these pagan men said that they wanted to reach heaven, and they were on their way to doing it. And God said anything that they imagined to do is not going to be restrained from them. Well, if we go back to Genesis 11, but verse 4, this is what they said. And let us go to and let us build a tower whose top may reach heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad the face of the earth. Go to the end of that section, verse 8 and 9. It says, and the Lord scattered them on the face of the earth. In other words, he took their own words and used that to authorize the fact that he was going to disperse their language and then do exactly what it is they said that was going to happen to them. God always uses man. This chapter is about unity and understanding authority of speech and the spiritual implications that are behind this. Revelation 17 and 3 tells us that at the end of days, and Revelation 17 is about mystery Babylon. It has a lot to do with this chapter right here. We'll get to that in a second. But it says that there's 10 kings. That's the 10 toes on that statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. 10 kings, and those 10 kings, it says they'll have one mind. They'll all think the same thing. They'll all be in agreement. Or in other words, the only other time the Bible used that phrase in that way was here in Genesis 11. It's showing you that they're utilizing the spiritual authority of unity. And it says they will give that power to the Antichrist. In other words, there is witchcraft that's happening here. It's not just saying there's 10 countries that are going to give over their authority to the Antichrist. It's saying they're going to be spiritually in lockstep with understanding of, the Bible says the Antichrist in Daniel, it says he will have understanding of dark sentences. Or in other words, he'll be able to cast spells. He will understand those things that were lost in Babylon, those spiritual things. Y'all remember when in Egypt, when God sent Moses and God said, just throw your stick down and it'll become a snake. Remember what happened? When he went and did that, there were two other people that were standing there next to the Pharaoh. They said, we could do that too. And they did. Their snake was less powerful than Moses' snake. Moses' snake ate their snake, but they did. I just need you to understand, when they threw the stick down, theirs became snakes too. Why? Because they understood spiritual things. It was witchcraft. It was far less powerful than the kingdom of heaven, but they still understood it. And that understanding is passed down. There's certain books, I personally believe they're in the Vatican. There's books in the bottom of the Vatican. There's mystery sections or things that they don't allow people to open and read. I believe that in those books is probably one of the places where you find some of these spiritual laws. Now, I'm talking about the spiritual stuff, and I'm just telling you that they understood this here in Genesis 11. I want you to understand why we might not have the exact right concept of when we think that they are severely less technological than we are. Why? And let me explain to you just in basis terms. Back in this time, man still lived several hundred years old. Remember, God said that man's days would be 120 when he said that to Noah. That meant 120 years from that point, but it also meant that after the flood, the atmosphere would change and people's lifespans began to shorten. Well, that shortening happened over time. It wasn't immediate. They didn't go from 900 years to 100 years. So here in Genesis 11, they're still living several hundred years. So if you have, just think about it, the wisdom of people that have been living for hundreds of years, not just them, but their offspring that comes after them, and the wisdom that they can garner from people who have been on this earth for hundreds of years, and the information that was passed to them who are people who have been on the earth hundreds of years more. There's so much more learning, there's so much more experience. So you have thousands of people that are multiple hundred years old that have been learning from people who are hundreds of years old. You understand? There's more information, especially spiritually, that's being passed here. Now let's take it further. There's also the angel concept. We dealt in Genesis chapter 6. In Genesis chapter 6, we understood and we proved, if you need to go back to that, go check it out. It's in the app. But we proved that that was actual angels that were sleeping with women and creating Nephilim, or giants, giant children. And that was one of the main reasons, if not possibly the main reason, that God flooded the earth. And that's what it says in Genesis chapter 6 when you break down the Hebrew. Well, from Jewish tradition, from rabbis, and from sources like Josephus, I think Josephus touches on this, and the Book of Enoch. And again, when I bring up different sources, I'm very careful about that because people can go left on that, and people can believe a whole lot of weird books that were left out of the Bible for a reason. A lot of the books that are these lost books and things like that should probably stay lost because it's very hard to authenticate many of them. And some of them I've read myself and tell you flat out that's not the Spirit of God. But some of them, I would at least give credence to them from the standpoint of historical. So you will hear me say things like the Book of Enoch. I count that at minimum as the same way I would count a history book. I may not count it as inspired, although in that particular one, I don't not count it as inspired either. But I may not count it as inspired, but I do count it at least historically something that I can garner from the same way I can study a social studies book and say, well, at least it's probably mostly true. And the reason I say that is because the book of Enoch is mentioned multiple times in the Bible. It's quoted from multiple times in the Bible. In Jude, the one chapter in Jude, it has several quotes from the book of Enoch. And I say all that just to say the book of Enoch really harps on this heavily and gives a lot of details. But even beyond that, the Jewish rabbis and Jewish traditions teach that angels, fallen angels, taught man wisdom. And in the book of Enoch, it tells you the specific wisdoms, roots, for example, how to use this root. They literally taught them witchcraft. They taught them astrology. They taught them the stuff that the Bible says to stay away from, because there's things in the stars that we're supposed to learn from. The Bible actually says, I put the stars up there for you to understand signs and seasons. So that there is something up there that we're supposed to have understanding of. But there's also a pagan side to that, in which the pagans have twisted it and made it into a way that manipulates your life, like zodiac signs. Well, these things were taught by these fallen angels. They gave wisdom to fallen man. They showed them technology. They showed them steel making. They showed them, oh, you don't have to do this making. You know, y'all always walk these caveman things. Oh, caveman made a wheel. These angels that showed them how to make a wheel, how to make a sword, how to make these sort of things. And when they were teaching these things, that probably is the reason why these people were making a gateway to the gods. Babel means gate to God. And God himself said, because they are in lockstep unity, because they are using the authority of their mouth, and they all are agreeing, nothing they even imagine will be restrained. That authority is still on the earth right now. That's why if you just get two people who are truly united in the same mindset, you can see things. There are paganistic rituals now. Many of you know about them. I'm not going to bring up what they are because I don't want people going and getting curious. But there's paganistic rituals now that many people have still, I'm talking regular, normal life people who aren't pagan. They didn't know that what they were doing was pagan, but they use chants and certain spirituality and unity, and they're able to see supernatural things happen in a regular basis. Again, I don't want to go too deep into it because I don't want to spark your curiosity. I just want you to understand that this law still exists right now. This universal law is still active right now, and if nobody else fully understands it, the Antichrist will, and he's going to use that as a way to bring himself into full power for the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. That's what it shows in the Bible. The Antichrist is a second coming of the man that started this tower. And the man that built this tower, who was in charge of the city, his name was Nimrod. Now, I'm bringing this up for the second portion of this chapter. I'm not going to go through the rest of this chapter. The rest of this chapter is Shem's family record. I mentioned that before. It's going to go through generations. The only thing I'll bring up, I'll talk next week about Abraham, where he came from, because we're going to get into Abraham from here. But what I need you to understand is the man that started this, his name was Nimrod. In the last chapter, it said Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Well, the actual wording from what most Jewish rabbis will show you is that actually meant he was a mighty hunter in defiance of the Lord. Or if you really look at the wording, and what it's saying is he became a world dictator because of his ability to hunt something, and he did it in the face of God. That's what it's saying. And you don't become a world dictator by hunting animals. I'm sure you can hunt animals too, but he most likely was a type of mercenary that probably went out on his own and just started killing people. He would hunt down men and kill them, and nobody could stop him. He eventually became so powerful that he built the world's first city. Notice cities are always seem to be built by pagans or by people against God. A whole other story there. But he caused the Tower of Babel to be built. Yeah, you know what? I had never brought this chat up. So if you guys are talking to me, I haven't seen it yet. I apologize. But he caused this tower to be built, and so he is going to be the picture of what we're going to see the Antichrist in the end. The picture here is We see the Antichrist being a second type of Nimrod. Also, Nebuchadnezzar, who got the dream, is also a picture of the Antichrist. All right, continuing on. Nimrod, from Jewish teachings, this is where all mystery religion and false doctrine came from. And I need you to understand that to the point where we'll get back to the word, which is Revelation 17, and why they go together, why we are mixed. Because again, I'm very careful about when I'm telling you something, especially if it's extra biblical, because everything that you hear extra biblical is not always true. Period. But when I go with the teachings of the early fathers and the teaching of rabbis, there's certain themes that they seem to continue to teach that match with what the Bible says, and it helps unlock what the Bible says. Let me give you an example. There is a story that, and many of you have probably heard this already, but for those of you who didn't, I'm gonna go through it. It's Nimrod and where mystery religions came from. Nimrod is supposed to have had a wife named Semiramis. You've heard the name. Semiramis has a child named Tammuz. Now, we've heard some of these names in the Bible, but Semiramis, for example, I haven't found that anywhere in the Bible. And we don't know much about Nimrod in the Bible. However, even the pagans trace the roots of their paganism back here, which is why I'm okay making sure that I explain it to you. So the story goes that Nimrod, and obviously this is a false story, but this is still where it came from. The story goes that Nimrod died. Now, that part's true. Nimrod died with supposedly a horrible death. And his wife, Semiramis, wasn't willing to accept his death. And she also called herself a virgin, by the way. And one day, her story was that an evergreen tree grew out of a dead tree stump. And when that evergreen tree grew out of that dead tree stump, that represented the rebirth of Nimrod, that Nimrod would be born again. Then she came up pregnant and said that it was Nimrod who, through his rebirth, had impregnated her spiritually after he died. And that Tammuz, their child, was the supernatural reincarnation of Nimrod being able to produce a child. This happened, catch this, on December 25th, according to the legend or whatever. Also, the reason December 25th really is in here is because it has to do with witchcraft, because December 25th, around the 22nd to somewhere between the 22nd and 26th, it moves a little bit, is what's called the winter solstice, which is when the sun shines the least in the world, and then it becomes new again. The moon becomes new again. Everything begins again. It's almost like the rebirth. And according to Semiramis, this represented the rebirth of Nimrod. She was supposed to be the Holy Mother Virgin. He was supposed to be died and reincarnated, and she was supposed to have a holy birth child while being supposed to be a virgin named Tammuz. And from this story, they begin to become worshipped. And these same story and these same people are the people you see all through the Bible that are worshiped under different names based on what culture you're dealing with. It's the same people, but different names based on the culture. So when you hear Baal, that represents Nimrod. When you hear Ashereth, that represents Semiramis. Now, when we get all the way down to the Greeks, it gets more named that you may hear more commonly. Zeus, and catch this, Cupid. Those are the same people. In the Egyptians, you've heard these names. Ra, the sun god, that's supposed to be Nimrod. So through every culture, they were actually worshiping the same set of people, just under the names of that culture. Just like in Hebrew, they had names, we call them Peter and John. Peter and John are not Hebrew's name. This is what we call them in the English. That's how we get to Ra from one place and Zeus to another. It's the same people, just in their language. So all of these false religions, they're not just made up stories, especially the Greeks. The Greeks and the names that they called their gods, did y'all know how much paganism is in our today's society? Just quick sidebar, almost all the days of the week are named after Greek gods. So when you get to Tuesday, you're dealing with a Greek, you're literally calling that name a Greek god's name. Just about all the planets are named after Greek gods, Jupiter and all those sort of things. So all this cute stuff, Hercules and Zeus, that's actually pretty much worshiping, I would say, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, or at least this false story that was given by them. See, Satan understood at least part of the game plan because God prophesied it back in Genesis chapter 3. He said, this is what I'm going to, seed of a woman is going to crush your head. There was prophecies that showed what was coming. So Satan muddies the water by saying, I'm going to try to do it first. And so he gives somebody an idea. They come up with a story, and that story sounds a whole lot like what's going to actually happen when Jesus is born, but it's under different names in advance. You ever heard somebody, atheist or somebody argue, well, you know, your Jesus, he's not even the first person of that story. I heard about somebody being born, you know, again after dying in a virgin birth and things like that. Thousands of years before Jesus was ever born, they already had that story. This is why it came from this place. This thing that was done with this unity of this paganism caused a spiritual outbreak. They essentially put a pole in the ground, and they caused the spirit world to be able to access the physical world in unusual ways. And so that story spread through the entire world. And this is where we get mystery religions. This is where a lot of witchcraft comes from. And this is what the children of Israel are fighting and battling the entire time. And not just battling, falling into Molech with the sacrifice of children. All of that all has its roots here in Genesis chapter 11. And that's the spiritual side, but there is also a governmental side. This was a city, and they were attempting to mix paganism with the city culture and governance and put them together and make a one world religion, one world government. What does the Bible say is going to happen at the end of days and during the 7-year tribulation when a world dictator takes over? He makes a one world religion and one world government. It is the completion of what they attempted to start here in Genesis 11. And God said, it's not time yet because I promise I'm not going to destroy the world. And we still got plenty of time before Jesus is even born. Therefore, I'm just going to scatter your languages from now based on your own speech, based on what you already said. I'm going to cause you to be scattered using your authority and until the time comes. And guess what? The Bible says the Antichrist cannot come to power in Thessalonians until the restrainer or he who restrains is removed. Or in other words, until the church and the Holy Spirit in the church is removed from the earth, which is why you see after even the two witnesses are gone, at the second half of the tribulation, the Antichrist comes into full power and completes what was began in Genesis 11. And guess what? He comes from the same territory of this area, Babylon, which is modern day Iraq. It was controlled by the Syrians at one point, which is why the Old Testament, they actually use the word Assyrian for the Antichrist. You know, Antichrist is one of the least titles given in the entire Bible for that man. It is a real title, but it's one of the least. It's just popularized in America. But the titles they give are things like the Assyrian in the Old Testament. That's the one world dictator that is to come. He's going to come from the Babylonian area where the spiritual laws are the strongest. And he will have understanding, the Bible says, of dark sentences. This all comes from this time period. Gateway to God, Babel, Bab-El, gate to God. They were building a way to access the spiritual. Now, pause, go into a little bit of conjecture just so we can catch what I'm saying here. I'm not saying this is that. I'm just saying, pay attention. There's a thing called CERN. I find it so interesting. It's in Geneva, Switzerland. The reason it's interesting about where it is because the Bible shows in what was it? Revelation 2, I think it is. Revelation 2 or 3. It says, I know where Satan's seat is. And it tells you who died where and what. And we can look up who died where and what. And it comes up to Geneva, Switzerland. Well, what's in Geneva, Switzerland right now is a huge underground particle collider. In front of it is I forgot the name. It's some Buddhist or Hindu evil witch god that represents Semiramis when it's all said and done. But I forgot her name. The goddess or something. She's doing this weird dance in a circle. Clearly a demon. But they have that as their statue in front of CERN. And it's the world's best scientists, and they are colliding particles in a miles-long underground particle collider, smashing them together at what they call an attempt to recreate the atmosphere in which the Big Bang happened. They're trying to break, they actually say they're trying to break open the fabric of the particles of our universe to see what's behind the other side. Or in other words, if you take out the scientist jargon out of that, they're trying to access the spiritual world. We don't know how well they're doing, but they've been this has been going on for I think almost a decade now, maybe longer. But that's happening in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Bible says that shows us that towards the end of days, that film between the spiritual world and the physical world seems to dilute significantly, because it's going to show you things that should only be spiritual that are going to be able to access the physical, like locusts, it calls them, coming from the earth and biting people and causing them to be in pain for 5 months. That's both spiritual and physical, but that's something that shouldn't have been possible, except that veil has been shortened. Something is causing demons to be able to come in. When you hear people talking about aliens, and I'm only bringing this weird stuff up because it's in the news now. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about aliens. But you see it all over CNN. They actually talk to the Pentagon, releasing alien files and all that stuff. All that is, the parts that are true, are demons that are entering into, for momentarily, our atmosphere. Somehow that veil is becoming smaller. The Bible says when he who restrains is removed, then they'll have access. When we, the church, or the church age is over, when we are taken away, when the Holy Spirit leaves this place, there's going to be a spiritual access like never before, where evil is going to be able to enter into the world like physically like they were not before. This is why in Daniel 2:43, to the statue with the 10 toes and the iron and the clay, it says, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they will not cleave one to another. In other words, whatever is mingling with the seed of men can't be man. So something spiritual is happening, whether it's just gene splicing and hormone and weird stuff, we don't know. But something is happening. Thank you, Tina. Absolutely. Tina, my wife, in the chat, she brought up the fact that cherubim look like aliens too. Actually, this is really true. Quickly, let's go there. Y'all notice that almost every time somebody sees an angel in the Bible, they fall out and pass out, or they fall to the ground. You know, we always look like, oh, I wish an angel would come to me. Sometimes that might be all right. They know how to make themselves look like men. We see that in the Bible too. But most of the time, they have to tell the person, fear not. And the person the Bible normally says they pass out, or they're just stuck with fear, and the angel has to touch them or something along those lines. Why? Because look at the cherubim and the way the angels are described in the Bible. Them things don't look pretty. They're not little harps. That's Cupid. Little harps or anything. No, the Bible says one will have a face of an ox and the face of an eagle, and the same thing, fire in his eye. I mean, 6 wings, they can look scary. And so when you see spiritual things, that is really what you're dealing with when you're talking about aliens. Alien is not some extraterrestrial from some other planet, but there are things that are aliens. I believe in aliens. They call angels and demons. The Bible, look at the way Ezekiel describes angels. He says it's a wheel in the middle of the wheel, and the wheels have eyes all around it. That's how he's describing angels. So, again, getting off that. When you see these spiritual things happening, it is because the veil of the spiritual is getting thinner, and there is more access into the natural. This is done by gates, gateway to God. There are ways to cause you to be able to access the spiritual. There's ways that are somewhat legal, like unity. There are ways that the Bible says are illegal, but just because they're illegal doesn't mean they're not accessible. And that's what we refer to as witchcraft. Notice the Bible says rebellion is as the spirit of witchcraft. Or in other words, anything that you intentionally do against the will of God is witchcraft. Why? Because there's more implications than just physically what you're doing. There are spiritual laws that are enacted whenever man speaks and whenever man does something that causes things to happen later based on what that man's authority is, what he covers, and what he did. And so God says, when you are doing it against me, that's witchcraft, because you are causing spiritual things that you might not even know about to happen because of your intent. And the first start of major witchcraft on a governmental level was here in Genesis 11. Now, before I close, because we're almost out of time, let me bring this all together. I want you to understand that this paganistic rituals never ended. They went through culture. Even the date stayed the same, to the point where December 25th again was celebrated by the Greek and Roman gods under different names, but it was the same people: Nimrod, Semiramis, all them. And even the day that we call Easter was one of their holy dates. See, Easter is named after the goddess Ishtar. Who was Ishtar? Semiramis. Oh, no, sorry. I think Ishtar is Tammuz, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but Ishtar, and Ishtar was the goddess of sexual perversion and fertility. Her symbol was a rabbit, because rabbits have a lot of sex. And they would take the blood of babies, sacrifice babies, and paint them on symbols of fertility, which is eggs. And this is where we get a lot of these practices from. Now, the reason that Revelation 17 exists, the prime, if this extra homework, if you get a chance to read Revelation 17 or go back and look at my video, it's called Mystery Babylon, because that's the spiritual side of what's happening here. But here in Genesis 11, there's two things: a spiritual and a government. The spiritual side was continued by Rome intentionally. So we have Rome that the Bible says that at some point they were going to begin to lose power. We saw this in the prophecy. And as Christianity rose, Rome began to lose power. But keep in mind, the Bible says that in Daniel 2, I'm going back and forth, Daniel 2, the statue that tells you about all the empires that are coming, the legs were Rome. Well, when we had arms, two arms, it was the Medo-Persian Empire. It was two empires, because one was one arm, the other was the other arm. The head was just one head, so that was Babylon. The arms were Medo-Persian, two. So when we get to legs, there's also two legs. People like to say it's just Rome. It's not. Rome is the spiritual side, one leg. In Revelation 17, it says Mystery Babylon will be on, it describes Catholics to T. There'll be apostate Christianity, a universal Catholic religion is what it's talking about. But it says they'll be on a city of seven hills. That's Rome. It says their colors are purple and scarlet. That's Rome. It says they're drunk off the blood of saints. Nobody's killed any more Christians than actually one pope killed more Christians than all the Caesars ever did. It's consistently Rome. But it's telling you that this place, the reason that God is so astounded is because they're going to blend Christianity with Nimrod's system. So here we have all of these dates that are celebrated by the pagans, celebrating Nimrod's system. Those are the people who are in charge of the temples in the Roman time. Well, as we shift to the other leg, the Bible shows us, and history shows us, that Rome began to lose power, and they reestablished themselves in Constantinople, Turkey, or what today is Turkey. And when they reestablished, guess what? They also find a city of seven hills. God is showing you that this is the same thing. That place then claims Christianity as their state-run religion, but they do not fire all the priests and popes and all the priests of the pagan, or get rid of their paganistic ways. They don't want to just all lose all their paganistic ways. So what they did, they blended the two together. So they said, we'll just say Jesus was born on December 25th, even though there's no history to show that, but we're gonna we want to keep our holiday of the winter solstice, so we'll call that Jesus's birthday. Oh, Jesus died in Passover, which is really close to when we celebrate Ishtar's day, so we're just going to say Jesus died on Ishtar. In English, that's Easter. It's where we get the word Easter from. It's named after a demon. All right. Jesus actually died on Passover, which is around the same time period. But they mixed the two together, which is why God refers to them as Mystery Babylon. That's the spiritual side. Now, the Antichrist is going to come with this spiritual side, but he's going to be a world dictator and make the world a one world religion and one world government, put them together. That's the governmental side. So there are two sides to this leg, and that other leg, the one that was Constantinople, eventually becomes the headquarters of the first worldwide Muslim religion. I don't have time to get into it, but what I believe, and I think I covered this in Revelation 17, that what the Catholics did when they blended the two together is the cause of the creation of the Muslim religion. There's a lot of history out there that we can study that actually says the Catholics intentionally created the Muslim religion for political reasons, kind of like the CIA creates factions in those Middle Eastern areas in order to overthrow somebody, and then they end up becoming a major terrorist group like ISIS and Bin Laden. Those were all kind of created by the CIA. Same thing. And Catholics created their own faction of people who eventually became Muslims, and that's what they're dealing with now. The Muslim religion and the Catholic religion are actually very, very tied in together. You'd be surprised how tied in they're together. They believe a lot of the same things. The Muslims actually believe that Mary was a virgin and Jesus was born of an immaculate conception. I didn't know that till I started studying it. They're together. But quickly, in Revelation 2 and 3, we have a letter to the seven churches called Pergamum, and that means pergamy, perverted marriage. Gamy is marriage, per is undesirable. So perverted marriage. And during that time period, what we find is that's when the Catholics blend paganism with Christianity. Well, the next church that comes after Pergamum is Thyatira, I think it's Thyatira. And then you find a Jezebel birthed out in the church. What am I saying? God is showing spiritually that because of what was done when the Catholics decided to make Christianity and paganism together, to blend the two together, it would birth out the other leg of that statue. And that birthed out perversion would be what comes at the end of the world, and that is the Muslim religion, which is why when you look at all the countries that the Bible shows are going to be against Israel in the last days, just go through and name them. Back what they were then, there was no Muslim religion, so they didn't say anything about Muslim. They just said this country, this country, this country. Well, look at the countries in today's time period that are all going to be against Israel at the end of days. It's Pakistan, Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia. They're all Muslim countries. Okay, all of them, other than Rome itself, are all Muslim countries. This is part of the plan, the end time plan for everything coming to an end. Zechariah 5, I don't have time to cover it, but what it shows is it says there's a woman and she's going to be trapped into a jar, and God's going to take her up by the wings of a stork. And if you understood this, that's not a positive thing, because stork was an unclean bird in the Old Testament. But the wings of the stork, and cause her to be placed in the land of Shinar, so she can receive the punishment, paraphrasing, of Babylon. Shinar is Babylon. Shinar is Iraq. So it says, I'm going to take a woman. Because of what she did, I'm going to make her be back joined in Shinar. Shinar is here in Genesis 11. They built this tower in the land of Shinar. What is it saying? I believe that woman is Mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon, according to Revelation 17, is the end time apostate Catholic Church. God is saying, I'm going to put you back together with what you started with. Because you caused paganism and you embraced paganism and put this into what you call Christianity, I'm going to put you back with the Antichrist so you can both receive your punishment at the end. So what you see when we get to the dealing with the Antichrist in the book of Revelation, you see the Antichrist has a false prophet. And even people who study the Catholic religion and Catholics themselves will tell you, based on the Bible, the false prophet is most likely a future apostate pope. A pope that's going to deny that Jesus was God and going to throw his hat in the ring with the Antichrist. God's going to put the two together because they started with each other. And God says they both will be punished together at the end. All of that goes back and leads back to Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. It was the start of false religions. It was the first one world government. It was spiritual universal laws being used by man against God. And it's the same thing we're going to see at the end. I believe this is how we put all these things together. I know I've been a little bit all over the place. I'm trying to wrap this all up in 1 hour, but If you want to take time to study it, just go for a good lesson to go back and listen to again is Revelation 11, Revelation 17 and 18. It's in my app, Kingdom Keys, or on my YouTube, and that will kind of go right hand in hand with this Genesis 11. You can see how they go one with another. I just try to quickly highlight certain points so you can see how they go together. I hope this is a blessing to you guys. If you have any questions, I'm out of time anyway, but if you have any questions, shoot them in the chat now. I hope this has been a blessing. Like, share this video so people understand what's going on and we can get an understanding of what's coming. Next week, Abraham. We're going to begin the next phase of the world. We're going to see Abraham and how he's going to eventually birth out the land of Israel. Hey, Steve, I see you, man. Daniel, appreciate you, brother. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you guys have been blessed. I'll see you guys same time, same place next week. Thursdays, 6 p.m. Eastern. God bless everybody.